What is up?
There it is.
Ta-da!
There it is. We tried a few different things, and I think ultimately, I apologize. So sorry.
All right. Well, let me set this up a little bit because this is exciting. So again, this is the premiere of Graders Corner Live on Elite Comics 11. That is Matt Nelson. He's the president and primary grader of CGC. So if you want to talk about grading, we kind of got the right person here. We got the person. So I'm very excited. Matt and I, the plan is once a month, we're going to sit down and I'm going to pass along some grading questions I got from our community, and Matt has made himself available for those. I think that's a shout out to CGC and Matt Nelson, definitely deserved for this kind of access for our community, Matt. I know you're busy, so I really appreciate you committing to this.
Yeah, thank you. No,
pleasure.
Thank you for having me on. Looking forward to doing this monthly. I think this is going to be great to have an ongoing conversation each month about what's going on at CGC. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no. So, okay. So we did a post. We asked for some questions. I got some questions there. I am going to keep my eye on chat to see if I have any additional questions that I think the criteria for these questions, we're not looking for an individual's situation with a particular book or whatever. We're looking for questions that will benefit the most people, like general questions about grading in general, the concepts, the policies, stuff like that. That's what we're looking for. So a lot of these issues, Matt, you got this book, the CGC guide. Why don't you talk about this? You wrote this book. A lot of the issues we're going to discuss are at least covered in this book to some extent. So why don't you tell them about this book?
On only one place, and that's online through the CGC store, Shopify. So if you go to our website, there's in the main page, there's a link to the Shopify where you can buy the book. So there's a hardcover and a softcover. Softcover's $30, hardcover's $40, and then we also have a signed and numbered bookplate version for $50, I think, as well. And I think those are limited to 500. We've sold a lot of them, so we still have some left. But once those are gone, those are gone. But any of those three you can get online. And yeah, there it is. Yeah, so it came out in October. We're working on it for, gosh, I think it was about 7 years. It's all encompassing. I put everything in there I could think of that pertains to grading. And not just grading a comic book, but also verifying it, authenticity, all the different variants and restoration, pedigrees. But it also goes into the history, touches on the history of comics, as well as how comics are printed, between the defects and the book itself. So yeah, it's a great. There's a little bit of something for everybody in the book, but primarily a good foundation for those who are just getting into grading or have been doing it for a little bit, but feel like they still have a lot to learn.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn, you guys. So there's this book. You guys need to get the book. It's a really good resource, but there are benefits to having access directly to Matt. He can explain some things that might not be, super clear at first pass, but he's the comic guru, grading guru, and he's the president and primary grader at CGC. So anyways, let's get into it. I want to pass along some questions we got from the community. Let's start things off with, we do a lot of live sales on our channel. There's books all the time we see with some writing. Maybe somebody did some math problems or they signed a name. It's not a witnessed signature. Just just writing on a comic, whether it's the front cover, back cover. Like, how much does that impact the book's grade? Like, does it matter, size, the number of writing? Like, kind of get into that a little bit. How much
and like you said, it depends on the size. That's the main thing. It also depends on the location. It depends on the era of the book and what the writing's for. So two extremes. One would be a golden age, and the writing is, say, arrival dates, or even a small name. And this is very common on golden age books. Arrival dates are on many of them, and arrival dates continued well into the 70s. Mm-hmm. And so for that reason, we don't really count off hardly anything for, you know, a small arrival date. And in fact,
And Matt, not to interrupt, but the arrival date, just because there's all kinds of people in here. So arrival date's when what a shop or a distributor would actually write
yeah,
the date
the
that
day it hit
the
the
book
stand.
came
So you can
out
actually
back in the
use
day.
that on some copies to identify the actual day a book went on sale, because you know the month that's published on the cover doesn't correspond. It's usually a couple months ahead. And so, you know, like in Action One, I don't know if there's one with an arrival date out there, but you can actually pinpoint the day it went on sale, which is usually a couple of months before the actual cover date. And so like the Mile High collection has, you know, it's famous for its arrival dates, and also another number notation that shows how many copies were on the stand. So for instance, you know, Timely Marvel Mystery might have had 8 or 12 copies, and then a lesser title may have only had 1 or 2. And so those are two notations you can see on that. But that's an example of an arrival date. Typically they're not big. They're, you know, as time goes on, for the later eras of comics, writing like that becomes a bigger factor in grading. So for instance, books, new books, or even books from the 90s that don't typically have arrival dates. In fact, they don't, I don't think any of them really do. Then writing becomes more of a factor, and just really writing in general is more of a factor in grading with that. So it has more of an effect as the books get newer. As far as like regular writing goes, it boils down to size, and this is really true for unverified signatures as well. So you know, a giant signature is the same as, you know, it's the same, you know, it's treated the same as writing at the same size. And we see things, you know, names, math problems, just any kind of scribbling or defacing, whatever, coloring. So we take all those things into consideration. You know, was markers used, a pen or a pencil? Was it the back cover, the inside cover? Did they trace? You know, that's another thing. And so writing can really fall into many different categories, but mainly it's based on location, size. You know, something that's going to affect the eye appeal of the front cover is going to have the biggest impact on grade.
Nice. So okay, so we just learned. So back in the day, Golden Age especially, some of the distributors or shop owners would write the arrival date on the book. You don't really ding for that. So that's something we learned. Also, you treat unwitnessed signatures on the cover as writing, and size matters for that. Okay. There's one exception that there's a lot of confusion. We see a lot of signatures on the first page, the splash page. A lot of the old school creators did that. Can you confirm that is not something that CGC dings for?
A bonus. But yeah, being on the first page, which is typically where we see signatures, because before 6 Series got going over the past several years, in the 90s and 80s and 70s, creators would sign on the first page. Collectors would have them sign at the bottom of the first page. That was typically the place they would put it. And so that you see a lot of signatures from those decades there, and that has no bearing on grade. In fact, we'll actually identify what was written on the label text if it's from somebody that we can recognize. You know, if it's just scribble scratch, we can't make it out. We're not going to identify that. But you know, clearly, if it's like Jack Kirby's signature or Stan Lee or anybody, Joe Shuster, anybody that signed back in the day, way back in the day, sometimes we'll put that on the label because we recognize that that's something really cool that you can't see through the holder, and we want to make sure that collectors know that it's there.
Definitely. Okay, so that's that. I mean, there's a lot obviously in that question. So for more, I would definitely check out the book, you guys, or, you know, when we do this again next month, if there's any sub questions, let us know on the post so we can pass the sub questions along. All right, switching gears a bit. So pedigree book. So this is exactly a question we got from the community. Somebody was asking, so they have a pedigree copy of, it's a slab, a pedigree slab from another grading company. They want to know if they cross-grade it to CGC, will CGC acknowledge that pedigree? I thought that would trigger a lot of just general conversation about pedigrees. What are they? How are they recognized? And, you know, so that was the question.
I mean, most of the time
we
do, because, you know, CBCS does their own homework on pedigrees. And most of the time there are telltale signs. There's markings or other attributes like conditions, smell, ink reflectivity, gloss. these are things that we become very familiar with on pedigrees over the years. Those of us that have been collecting.
Wait. Did you say you recognize
Yeah,
some
there's
pedigrees by
yeah.
their smell?
I think the Big Apples have I think it's Big Apples kerosene smell. The Hawkeyes have a mothball smell. The Mahais have a cedar smell. White Mountains have a distinct smell. Yeah, and it's not the end all be all, because obviously smells can fade in a book depending on their storage conditions. But it's one of several things that we're looking at when we're identifying pedigrees. So we have a lot of resources. We've got our own experience, having seen hundreds and thousands of these copies from different collections, and we also have the original lists of a lot of them. We have Providence. We'll talk to, if someone will reach out to a submitter if there's a particular question. They may have paperwork or a trail of who they bought it from that we can confirm. But most of the time, we can tell what's in front of us. So, even if a book's graded by a competitor, we're still going to do our due diligence, but most of the time we can confirm that it is a pedigree based on those attributes.
So somebody asked, yeah, there's a more basic question. Again, there's all kinds of different levels of expertise or knowledge in the room. So the first question, the basic question we should start with is, so what is a pedigree? What is a pedigree?
Yeah, there's a whole chapter on it in the grading guide, of course. I've planned a pedigree book now for many, many years with who used to be my partner, Steve Ritter, when we were in business together worldwide. That got sidetracked, obviously, for the grading guide primarily, but we're going to get back in on that this year shortly. So the pedigree book is definitely not definitely on hold. We're going to dive back into that. And I think actually the exercise of going through creating the grading guide for CGC has kind of helped me get a better understanding of how to approach the pedigree book. So I think it's actually going to be better that we waited. But so pedigrees there's three criteria that they have to follow. Original owner, that's number one. That's basically the books had to be amassed by one individual or a couple of people as they came out. For the golden age, that would be literally buying them off the newsstands in the 40s, 30s, 40s, Silver Age in the 60s. The second is that it has to be high grade because obviously, technically, every comic book it came from an original owner collection. So we differentiate with the pedigrees by grade. And then the third factor, which factors into that as well, is the contents of the collection. And so the contents is a little bit more. We can play with that. For instance, like Golden Age, there's so many different titles and eras and publishers during the 40s and 50s that there's many different Golden Age pedigrees that represent only certain eras or certain companies. For instance, the Chicagos are mostly Timely's, and then you've got collection. The Northfords are mostly horror comics. You've got a few collections that are only #1 issues, like the Windy City, and so. There's different contents that have led to a pedigree. The Silver Age are a little different though, because the Silver Age are kind of more condensed into your two primary companies, DC and Marvel, and of course you also have like Dell and Archie and Gold Key and ACG. But Marvel and DC are obviously the ones that most people collect, and also that they're more prevalent by the 60s. They were being kept. They didn't go through those additional 20 or 30 years of being thrown out, paper drives. And so we're more selective about choosing a Silver Age pedigree. And so the criteria is a little more stringent in terms of content for that. Those have to be relatively complete from the early years up. So for instance, Marvel, which started November 61 with FF1, those first few years when all the keys came out, 62, 63, and a 64, that's a tough period. And then about 65, 66, Marvels really start to, you start to see more of them. They're still not common in high grade, but there's something that kind of flipped there in 65, 66. And so you'll see a lot of collections that are beautiful, comprise late 60s on comic books, but most of them you'll notice are always missing that crucial period of the early 60s for the Marvels. And so, the criteria for pedigree for us is those have to be there and they have to be in grade. FF1 and up, Spidey 1 and up, X-Men 1 and up, Daredevil 1 and up. And so it's hard. And when you actually start to apply those criteria, you'll see that there's not a lot of Silver Age pedigrees. Out of the 61 we recognize, I don't know how many are silver, a good chunk of them are. But that's those are tougher ones to get. And then beyond that, they can have bronze in them. I mean, there's some collections that run up into the 80s and 90s. I think like the Savannahs go very late, and a few others. So whatever they have beyond that point is fine, as long as they have that period of books in there. And of course, DC would be similar. They'd go back a little further into the late 50s. But that's the criteria for pedigree.
So again, so you got these incredible original owner collections that have been recognized by CGC as pedigrees. And then you said you recognize them by writings, smells, like all kinds of different ways to recognize that these are actually books from that collection. The specific question was CBCS slab, send it to CGC, will the pedigree be acknowledged? It sounds like the safest thing to do would be to just send it to CGC in the slab that recognizes the pedigree, just so that's like the baseline when it arrives. Is that,
and the holder,
something you would
because
advise?
we know that it came directly from them, because once you crack it out, you send it in with a tag. Well, who knows where the tag came from? I mean, most of the time, people are going to include the original tag that was with that book. But there's always that possibility. And so, yes, it's best to turn it in with the book actually in the holder, which gives it a little extra, assurance that this really did come from, this is CBCS's opinion.
Right. So you'll
look for the,
smell for the right
smell
thing.
the book, check out the writing.
Okay. All right. Well, that was interesting. I think whoever asked that question, I think that was a great answer. So I think you got your answer there. So that's what this is about. And then, okay. So restoration, obviously something that collectors are constantly dealing with, especially people picking up raw books, trying to detect restoration. So black light, it's a really good tool to kind of pick up color touch. You get a black light, it usually, any color touch usually pops if you put a black light. People ask, are there any tips and tricks that you have over the years to kind of that you could share to detect like color touch or trimming? I think trimming's a tough one. You got any tips maybe
absolutely.
you can share?
It depends on what the restoration is, but there's different tips for each kind. And again, this is there's a whole chapter on restoration detection. And so there, the back also
chapter in this book on this
11 or 12 different techniques, which are identified in the back of the book as well. So each one, color touch is broken down, cover cleaning, tear seal, so on. So, but your two primary types of restoration we find are color touch and glue. Slight in nature, usually done amateurishly, quickly by somebody back in the day who just wanted to like make the book a little prettier. That's by far what we see in the grading room the most often. And the glue is pretty easy. You really have to feel for it. Sometimes you can see it the way it shines, but glue is primarily going to be on the spine or maybe closing a tear or reattaching a piece on an edge. So there's the evidence on the spine is there when you feel it, and it's hard and crusty around the staples maybe, or the top and bottom corner. Obviously, if you see a tear or a piece that looks like it should be detached, but it's not, you look at it in the light, you can feel it, you can kind of see if there's evidence of glue is there as well. And of course, another common way is when you open the cover along the spine, you can see sometimes it's glued to the first wrap. That's very obvious. So you open that up and it's just stuck, and you start feeling around, you're like, all right, it's hard and crusty. So glue is pretty easy, I think. If you know to look for it and how to look for it, you can find it. Color touch can be a little bit more difficult. Sometimes it's real obvious, jumps out at you. Again, it's going to be the spine, dark areas of the cover, the front cover, very rarely the back cover, very, very rarely on the interior. Front cover, you get lucky, sometimes it bleeds through, so when you open the inside cover and look, you can see little spots, usually the edges of the inside spine where it bleeds through, so that's a dead giveaway. The spine line, looking for stress lines that should break color, and maybe they do break color, except right on the black they don't. Somebody went right in the black and touched it. And so those are that's another trick to tell. Just seeing kind of a variance in the gloss, something that's more of a matte area, particularly over a defect like a crease. But basically, you're looking for spots on the front cover where color should be missing, but it's not. And just being able to tell a crease that breaks color, but yet it doesn't. And so you got to look closer, get a loop maybe. The black, you mentioned the black light. It's honestly, we don't use black light. I think it's helpful in some situations, but generally, like black light doesn't pick up black, and black is the most common color used in color touch. It's really helpful with professional restoration, which is a third part we haven't talked about yet. But that's where you have your books that have many things done to it, moderate or extensive restoration, and you get into professional techniques like cover cleaning, leaf casting, large amounts of piece fill and color touch, tear seals, spine split seals using rice paper. So in some ways, this is more evident because there's so much of it there, but it's also done professionally, so it's harder to catch, unlike, say, color touch that doesn't match or bleeds through. And so a black light in those cases will work well because you're seeing large amounts of color touch or moderate amounts, and particularly on the white, like the inside cover, the back cover, and you hold that black light, you can see it'll turn purple, like a dark purple, like a blob. And unlike color touch amateur on the front cover, professional restoration, moderate, extensive, can be anywhere on the book. You can have color touch all over the borders on the back cover, the inside cover along the spine, even the interior. People replacing paper along the spine or the corners, and they'll even do some color touch there. So professional restoration could be anywhere, but a black light works best with that type of restoration.
Okay, and I think, there's a lot to this. So, the book, we mentioned the book, the color touch, so you brought up a good point. So black light, not super effective on some black color touch. You mentioned looking at the inside front cover out. That might help pick up some color touch that might be missed. Somebody brought up a really good point, though, and it's CCS or CGC pre-screening for restoration. So yeah, you try to detect the restoration if you're going to go out and buy a raw book. But if somebody wants an answer before maybe they incur grading costs, or maybe they want to know and then get restoration removed, I personally have used CCS for that before. Is that still available? Is that service still there?
And somebody asked about our grading scale for restoration and conservation. I'll touch on that too. But yes, CCS does the 4 services that are listed in the book, the 4 different enhancements, I call them, which is pressing, restoration, conservation, and removal. So CCS does all 4 of those. Obviously, pressing is the most common thing. Removal would be the second most common. So what we do is the books come in, we screen them first to check to make sure that they are restored, what kind of restoration was done, and if it can be removed safely, and what effect it has on the book grade-wise and value-wise. So there's a lot of factors that go into that evaluation. There's a lot, oftentimes we reject books for removal because one of those reasons doesn't pan out. Maybe the grade's going to drop too much, or there's too much color touch to remove safely. But yeah, we absolutely do that. And at some point we'd like to be able to, where in the grading room, if we see restoration, we can identify it then and actually let the customer know that this is present, and do they have an option to actually remove it, rather than it going back to them and back to us. So these are things we're going to be working on in the future. But as far as the scale goes, I'll just touch on it quickly because it is kind of convoluted. It's even more convoluted than the grading scale. But again, it's in the book. It's also on the website as well. So quickly, we use quantity and quality. So we use 2 different scales for restoration. Quantity is 1 through 5, 1 being slight, 5 being extensive, 3 being moderate, and of course the 2 splits there for 2 and 4. And then quality is A, B, or C. So A being professional restoration, C being amateur. So as I said earlier, most books that come to the grading room have slight amateur restoration, color touch, or glue. Those are usually going to get a C1 or a B1. So C meaning amateur, 1 meaning slight in nature, just a few hits of color touch on the spine or a crease, maybe a little glue on the staple. That's always going to get a 1 because that's not a lot of work. Now, when you get into professional restoration, where you get into piece fill and color touch are going to be your 2 primary restoration techniques that will push the quantity up. Because, tear seals are always going to be a 1, spine split seals are always a 1, cover clean. But when you get into piece fill, now you're replacing larger parts of the book that are not original, pushing to a 2 or a 3 or a 4 or 5. And go up from there to the point where you're replacing the entire cover. And color touch the same way. If like all the edges of the border are color touched in the back, and a lot of the front's color touched, that can be a 3 or 4 or a 5 in terms of of quantity. But usually professional restoration is going to get either an A or a B, the opposite of the little touch-ups that some kid did on his comic. So typically, coming from one of the professional restorers that use professional materials and techniques, the color matches, those are going to get.
Is that professional? Is that professional because it can be like it's made to be able to be removed, or what makes it professional versus
removal
amateur?
is a factor. The materials used is a factor, and the application is a factor. So, if they like, for instance, Color Touch usually is acrylic or watercolor, and obviously they need to match pretty well. Rice paper or leaf casting would be used for replacing pieces or sealing splits or tears. Cover cleaning, that's done in a way that doesn't cause expansion or shrinkage of the cover, doesn't cause the colors to fade, or remove the gloss and make the paper threadbare. So these are all things that we look for when we're grading the restoration. Now, conservation is a subset of restoration, so it includes only some of the techniques, but they have to be slight in nature. So that's a subset of conservation. So it's or restoration. So it's more stringent rules that are applied, but overall, basically, it's professional materials that have been applied professionally. And the point of it is just kind of get the book back together again. It's not taking that extra step of aesthetics where you're doing in-painting and filling in all the missing areas with Color Touch. You're just getting it back together. It's mainly for books that are lower grade, that are in pieces or have like a serious spine split or something. So it's definitely been a very conservation has really blown up the past few years. In fact, there's a few people on Instagram that do conservation, have really made a good career out of it. So very excited to see that's taken hold.
So quick recap. So especially, I think the coating. So what are we talking about? So you see like a purple slab, restoration slab, CGC. Suppose so it lists the restoration, and then you see like a letter and a number. So C2, if you see C, let's just take an easy example. Just Color Touch on a book. If it has C2, C means amateur Color Touch. 2 on a scale of 1 to 5. It's some Color Touch, but not a ton. Obviously, because it goes up to 5. Is that all
convey in the podcast? But yeah, 2 would be. I think we had the measurements online as well. I think it's like a ½ inch by ½ inch or 1 inch by 1 inch or something in there where that amount of color touch. And it's hard. We use those terms, but really when you're in the grading room, the truth is the color touch is never in one place. It's like down the spine, across this crease, top edge. It's in 4, 5, or 6 different places or more. And so you kind of have to visually or mentally pull it together and quantify it in your head. So most of the time it's a 1. Like I said, we get 2s in with amateur restoration, but usually it's going to be, C1 or B1 are going to be your 2 most common categories for restoration on, the books that we just get in the grading room that just have a little bit of touch up on them. And those are also the best ones for removal candidates as well, because they have to be slight in nature. They don't have to be A or B. C does require a little bit extra digging sometimes to get the color touch out or the glue. But yeah, a slightly restored book are going to be your best removal candidates.
All right. All right. The next question, and we got a lot of questions about. So people are generally familiar with the comic slabs. There's magazine slabs as well, magazine holders. So these are bigger books than your regular size comic that a lot more people are familiar with. Any changes, upgrades, anything like that potentially for CGC
we got the new ones finally coming out after a few months of design and waiting for everything to come in. I think we're very close to launching it. I think we're days away, and it's very exciting because it's been long in the coming. Our new comic holder hit, it's been almost 7 years ago now, this April. And so magazines, we've been wanting for a long time to mirror that. And so the design for the magazine holder is gonna be just like the comic holder in terms of its, the way it looks and feels, obviously just bigger. Ooh. So yeah, everything that you didn't like about the old magazine holder is going to change. The labels will now the top labels will be on the inside. The labels will be flat on the platform. They'll be really, rigid and sturdy, probably more clear. And so, yeah, huge step up for magazines. So very excited about that coming out. And of course, we've held the magazine submissions the past couple of months in preparation for this. So we, and also because I think the supply line actually got cut off on the old ones. So we're finally through that transition now, and we've just started grading the magazines in preparation for the holder hitting. And so as soon as it does, they're going out the door. Yeah, we're going to start shipping those babies out.
As somebody who loves Ninja Turtles 1 in the magazine size, I'm looking forward to the new upgraded magazine slab. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, tips and tricks. Another question I got. Okay, one last question. I don't know if you have any information on this, but obviously magazine grading takes longer than comic grading generally right now. Anything to look forward to on that? Any chance they're going to get any faster anytime
now
soon?
that the magazine holder is upon us, we're now pushing magazines to go through grading. And you know, one thing I've noticed some people have said online is they think that if we're grading, if the books are coming out faster, we're grading faster. And I just want to make it clear that the grading process never changes. If we just basically, if we're caught up, we're just, you know, grading books that come in and get them out sooner. So the actual grading process, we're not going any quicker. We're still applying the same exact standards we have, and that's true for magazines and anything else that we grade. But yeah, we've got caught up on moderns a few months ago. We're burning economies down right now. That's our last comic tier to get on top of. We're expecting to be on top of that here, you know, in a few months, few months. And then magazines are going to be are going right along with economy. So there's not as many magazines in our backlog as say economy. So it's going to burn down quicker than that probably. So I think you're going to see the magazine turn times come down pretty fast here in the next couple of months. So, you know, I think by the summer we should be completely caught up on everything.
All right, new magazine slabs and possibility of some faster turnaround times on magazines. All right, that's good news. Great to hear that. All right, I'm going to call on Audible here because I think it's an interesting area. Trimming, we were talking about restoration. Trimming, very difficult restoration to detect for a lot of people. I mean, what can you tell us about any tips?
That is by far the toughest
one.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier. That I put that one aside and talked about the common stuff. Luckily, trimming is not that common, but it is very difficult to detect because you're looking for something that's not there. You're not looking for color touch or glue or anything that's sitting on the book or foreign to the book. You're literally looking for, you know, there, but it's not. So how do you tell? Well, there's a lot of different ways to tell. There's obviously the obvious trimming where, you know, the edge of the book is cut. Now, you know, obviously you've got your three edges. It can be completely, the edge can be completely trimmed, or maybe it's just the cover, or maybe it's just the centerfold. On a rare occasion, it might be one individual page, but usually it's a full edge of a cover. It might be one edge, two edges, or all three. And the most obvious trimming is going to be where it's just the edges are flush. And so when I say flush, for people that are not really familiar with, I guess, how books are printed and how they look in hand, the pages on the right edge at the top right corner, the way they were stapled, folded, and trimmed at the factory, it created this weird effect to where the pages fan out, and the top right corner, they come to a point. And then as you go down the right edge of the book,
it shouldn't look like this.
Right. Yeah, regular comics, that would be trimmed.
Yeah,
like now so that was made like a square bound. So actually, so the grading guide is like a square bound comic, and those do have flush edges because they're put together completely different. So that's a whole different animal. But usually, you know, you see it, but typically we're dealing more with the traditional comics that are folded and stapled through the spines. And so yeah, you have that point on the right edge that fades down. But there's actually two other points. There's 3 points. There's a point in the top spine on the interior pages, point on the top right edge, and then a point on the bottom right corner facing downward. And so there's 3 points because the book is kind of torqued after it's printed and trimmed. It's really weird. But so those points you have to look for those points. And marks around the edge, along the edges as well, particularly like gold and the silver age. The blades didn't cut them exactly straight, so they have little notches. And then there's also aging of the edges of the paper, how sharp the corners are sometimes, comparing one edge, the top edge to the bottom edge, or even comparing one comic to another. If we have a book that is in question, sometimes we'll actually lay it on another copy that we of course have, because we have like tons of books laying around everywhere. And so, we can usually tell like obvious trimming that's like a 1/4 inch off. You lay it down, you're like, wow, this book is much shorter. It doesn't really work as well when there's like real minor trimming going on. So trimming, it just in general, I know I'm kind of throwing some things out there, but it's really hard. It's almost something that you have to show somebody in person with a trimmed book. And then on top of that, even when you're in here grading comics, it takes months and years to really get honed in on the trimming, because we're talking about obvious trimming where the edges are chopped, but sometimes you get books where the cover's trimmed, and you might get lucky and open it, and the cover's doing this because somebody took a pair of scissors to it, but sometimes they use the straight edge, and so then you have to resort to other techniques to try and figure out if it's trimmed or not. So it's the subtle trimming is the scariest stuff, but luckily trimming has, I feel like we've, CGC has curbed the act of trimming, certainly, over the past 20 years. So, people, we're not seeing, people are not trying to, to fool us that much. So I don't feel like it's a danger to the hobby, given how hard it is to spot. But we definitely have, a lot of, we apply our tricks. Every time we get a trim book that we're unsure of, because, if you're sure of it, you're like, I trim. Go on to the next book. But sometimes, you got to get up and go to the other guys, the girls and the experts, and show them the book, pass it around, and be like, what do you think of this edge? And we talk about it, and, do our tests and everything and make a call. So, yeah, every once in a while, it'll throw you. It's definitely by far the hardest thing to spot.
It's a good reminder, though. Well, that information is great, but also as if you can, to the extent you can remember, or you're able to, Matt, maybe since we're going to be doing these once a month, if you got any examples that you want to kind of put away, maybe you could bring them on with you, like maybe show people a little bit. That would be good. But yeah, trimming's super hard to detect. So I like your point about how it's supposed to look. The pages aren't supposed to be completely flush. That's kind of a good starting point.
It's and the way you can curl the book to where the pages, the interior pages, they should kind of stack in a very uniform manner, and the top and bottom actually kind of curved. There's all these, it depends on the era. I mean, it's you could write a whole book on trimming probably. It's very, very tough. But at the same time too, it's tough to do it. If someone's out there trying to micro trim a book and get away with it, there's a lot of things that they have to do. It's just hard. It's hard to pull off. It's hard to spot. It's tough. So, it's
that's helpful. And again, there is the book you could consult as well, but it's definitely a hard area. You could do the pre-screening at CCS.
There's actually a lot of good pictures on trimming in the book. Come to think of it, in the trimming section, there's a lot of things we talked about in there. So yeah,
definitely. So let me ask you this. So I saw in chat another Audible. A lot of people are excited about pulps. They have it in their mind that CGC is going to be.
I just heard the other day that we're not
doing
them.
Update on that?
I guess we're not doing them. I don't know. Yeah, my phone started blowing up when that went up. So no, absolutely. Yeah, we're 100% moving forward on that. We're getting close. I know I've learned my lesson over the past 2 years to not give dates or even guesstimates to date ranges when they're coming out. But we are very, very, very close. And we're basically in the final stages of everything: the holder, the database, the grading, all that stuff, pressing. Pressing is even going to be a factor in there. But no, I'm extremely, and I'm working with some people on tying together whenever this time comes. I noticed Heritage has got a lot of great pulps that they're auctioning off throughout the year. And so I think when it comes, it's going to be really big. It's going to be really exciting to see the pulps in the holders and the cool pulps that'll be in the holders. And then obviously the pulps are out there to be bought or auctioned. and of course all the collections, all the people that have pulps. So it's going to be an interesting experiment to see what and what goes up for sale, because I think pulps, you know, what I've learned is it's a bit of an insular hobby, and the guys that have been in it for a long time have you know, amazing collections, and they've been looking for the best stuff for years. And so there's a lot of great stuff locked up. You know, I'm curious to see how it comes out. You know, obviously we've seen in the past, you know, some of them sell for really crazy prices, and then it starts bringing them out of the woodwork. So, you know, that may happen with pulps as well, especially given this heated market that we're in, where, you know, people are paying crazy prices for Golden Age books, you know, for the cover. And then all of a sudden you turn around, there's this pulp with this cover that's like 10 times crazier, you know, and so what is that market going to pay for that? And so I think that's going to be a big driver in the pulp market once you see a lot of these great books come out. But on the other hand, they're pretty scarce, and you can't find them in high grade. You know, most of the grades are going to be fine, VG, good, probably around there. You might get some VFs here and there, but you know, pulps up in the 9s, that's going to be really, 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 really rare. You know, maybe the factory trimmed ones are probably going to have the best shot, but most of them have overhang, and that overhang is just going to bring them down below that. So, but grading is definitely going to be, it's going to be fun. We're geared up for it here in the grading room. We can't wait.
Sounds like you're gonna need some bigger slabs, which somebody's asking. What about treasury slabs?
We talked about that.
That's a
Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah, the treasuries. I mean, the only
machine.
problem with that is that, you know, a traditional holder is just going to be too big, too heavy. That sucker's going to break. You know, but I have a few ideas about that as well. So it's in the bucket list. You know, once we get on top of everything here, which we're, you know, every month that passes, we're getting closer and closer to that. Then we're going to start going in that bucket and looking at some other ideas that we've been sitting on for a while, and see if we can't get those rolling. But yeah, the pulp holder is basically going to be just like the comic holder, just deeper. And of course the inner well is going to accommodate the overhang on the pulps. So we've got that all nailed down and finalized, and it looks great. We've got, you know, the prototypes look fantastic. Straight on, it's going to look just like a comic book, both the pulp and the holder. And so I think the integration into the comic collecting community is going to be pretty seamless, and I think exciting, because it's kind of a new frontier for a lot of collectors who, you know, maybe been aware of them but have never really delved into them, and they don't know what amazing stuff is out there. And, you know, in my experience the past 3 years, it's unbelievable. So I'm really excited for everyone to kind of get into this and see it. So it's going to be a lot of fun this year.
I got one more, because of time, I got one more kind of question we got from the community beforehand that I want to pass along. And that was just, you know, confirming that a book is complete is a big part of what collectors have to do on their own. Do you have any tips on how to verify a book is complete? I mean, coupons cut, that's pretty self-explanatory, but how many pages are supposed to be there, and which year? Any resources for that? Like,
resources online now. Obviously, again, the grading book there's a whole section on confirming completeness, page counting. It also gives some guidelines on the eras and the number of pages that are contained within comics from those eras, square bounds, you know, all of that stuff. But when we're in the grading room and we're counting pages, that's one of the first steps that we do. Some tips. 90, I'm going to say 99% of the time, but generally, the book should have an equal number of pages and the same number of pages in the front and the back, using the centerfold as the center point. So, you know, like your typical, you know, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s book is going to have 8 wraps folded, which is 8 pages in the back, 8 pages in the front from the centerfold. So that's 16 pages. And that's 6 in a page. When I say 16, I mean the front and back of a page is a page. You know, if you're, you know, some people are saying, well, I read page 1, I flip it over, I read page 2, that's 2 pages. No, it's like the physical page itself. And so, you know, eight wraps or 16 pages on a newer comic, Silver Age to newer. Although the brand new ones now, some of them have 7 wraps or 14 pages. Then you go back to the Golden Age, and that's going to be like 16 wraps or 32 pages. So that covers generally everything. There was a period in the early 40s during World War II when they had what they call tipped-in pages. So it's a weird count where you'll have 12 pages in the back and 16 in the front because they actually glued a page in to an adjacent page in 4 places in the first half of the book. And it's kind of an anomaly, but it's only during those couple of years. I think there might be tipped in pages elsewhere, but they're very rare. And then, you have weird, like anomalies from the late 40s, early 50s, where you might have like 12 wraps or 9 wraps or something. But generally speaking, if you're counting, you're looking for that equal number on both sides. So this is really easy if there's a missing page, because if there's one page missing, you're going to have an odd number of pages, or one side's going to have more pages than the other or something. So the tricky part is when you're missing a centerfold, because now you've got a page missing from both sides. And so then you have to rely on the page count. So the page count, internally, we have page counts for all the books. Online resources like the Grand Comic Database, they'll have page counts, but sometimes they include the covers. So it's a little tricky because not every book, I don't know if I would depend on the data for every book, but generally speaking, like I said, if you usually can figure out if it's a 16 or an 8 wrap book. But here's another trick. So what we'll do is, if we're trying to identify, let's say a wrap's missing from the middle of the book, and there's no evidence of a page being torn out, it's not the centerfold because the story matches or whatever, then what we'll do is we'll go to the Grand Comic Database, and you can actually, they have the stories listed, and they'll have how many pages for each story. So you can actually go literally story by story, go, okay, this is 8 pages. Then you have an ad page, and you have a half page, another ad, and then you have like a text page, another story. And you can actually, we've had a lot of success with pinpointing the exact page or wrap it's missing based on page count as well. It takes a little bit of work, but that's a backup in case you don't have that access to that information otherwise. So yeah, but yeah, the even number, that's the key there, even on both sides.
All right, well that's helpful. I hope that answers that person's question. So this is the first Graders Corner of the year. We're gonna the plan is to do Matt and I are gonna do one of these every month. I think they're gonna get better as they go. This one was great, but I think they're going to get better as they go. We need community involvement. Next time you guys see the post asking for some questions, definitely drop your questions in that post so we can prep and get some, we want thorough answers to your issues. So that helps a lot, you guys. So if there's a question you guys think of, drop it in the post ahead of time. I've tried to pass on some questions from chat live, but it's much better if we get the questions ahead of time. Matt and CGC, you guys are awesome for even doing this in the first place. This is access. I don't think anyone else is given this kind of access.
Welcome, Ali. Yeah,
thank you very much for your time, Matt.
I will try next time to get on to get into the chat on time. But yeah, we'll definitely work on that. I think it's going to get easier with each passing month. So I'm looking forward to the next one already.
All right. Take care, man. See you, man.